Disturbing facts that will probably disturb you even if you're not easily disturbed. Part 100. Buckle up, buttercups, because it's about to get disturbing up in this. And if that is not enough of a trigger warning for those of you that need a trigger warning. On the morning of September 30th, 1999, at a nuclear fuel processing plant in Japan, 35-year-old Hisashi Ouchi and two other workers were purifying uranium oxide to make fuel rods for a research reactor. Ouchi was standing at the tank holding a funnel, while a coworker poured a mixture of intermediate enriched uranium oxide into the funnel from a bucket. Suddenly, they were startled by a blue flash of light, and that blue flash of light was the first sign that something terrible was about to happen. Ouchi, who was closest to the nuclear reaction, received what was probably one of the biggest exposures to radiation in the history of nuclear accidents. The workers, who had no previous experience in handling uranium with that level of enrichment, inadvertently had put too much in the tank. As a result, they triggered a release of radiation from an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction. High doses of radiation damage the body, rendering it unable to make new cells. So that the bone marrow, for example, stops making red blood cells to carry oxygen and the white blood cells that fight infection. When Ouchi arrived at the hospital, he did not look like a victim of intense radiation exposure. His face was a little bit red, and his eyes were bloodshot, but he did not have any blisters, and the only pain that he complained of was some pain in his ear and his hand. The doctor who examined him even thought it might be possible to save his life. But Ouchi's condition continued to deteriorate. He began to complain of thirst, and when the medical tape was removed from his chest, his skin started coming off with it. He began developing blisters. Tests showed that radiation had killed the chromosomes that normally would enable his skin to regenerate, so that his epidermis, the outer layer that protected his body, gradually started to dissolve. The pain became intense, and he began to have breathing issues. 2 weeks after the accident, he was no longer able to eat, and he had to be fed intravenously. Doctors tried to restore some functionality to Ouchi's immune system by administering peripheral blood stem cell transplantation, which at the time was a new form of treatment. Ouchi was kept alive for 83 days after the initial radiation exposure. Many interventions were conducted in an attempt to arrest further decline of his badly damaged body, including but not limited to the repeated use of skin grafts, broad-spectrum antibiotics, among other things, without any measurable success. Although small areas of Ouchi's skin and mucous membranes recovered with treatment, his overall condition continued to deteriorate. The medical personnel caring for him privately doubted whether treatment should be continued due to the lack of effectiveness and out of concern for the pain for Ouchi. 2 months after the accident, Ouchi's heart stopped. Although he was revived, he became unresponsive. Now this is where it gets a little bit muddled, because some sources say that it was the doctors keeping him alive so they could experiment on him, basically. Others say that his family tried to keep him alive because his wife said that she at least wanted him to ring in the new millennium, January 1st, 2000. Ouchi's condition eventually deteriorated into multiple organ failure, and he died 10 days shy of the new millennium. Unit 731 was responsible for some of the most notorious war crimes ever committed by armed forces. Unit 731 is famous for human experimentation, including disease injections, controlled dehydration, biological weapons testing, hyperbaric pressure chamber testing, vivisection, organ harvesting, amputation, and standard weapons testing. I'm going to give you the opportunity to stop watching because it's about to get really dark. Okay, 3, 2, 1. The victims included not only kidnapped men, but also women, children, pregnant women, and babies born from systemic rape perpetuated by the staff inside the compound. Prisoners were injected with diseases that were disguised as vaccinations, just so they could study their effects. They would deliberately infect people with syphilis and gonorrhea, just so they could see what would happen if it was left untreated. Thousands of women, men, children, and infants were subjected to vivisection, more often than not without any kind of anesthesia. If you are not aware of what vivisection is, it is literally performing operations on live animals and or people just for the sake of experimentation. In a video interview, a former Unit 731 member admitted to having vivisected a pregnant woman. Vivisections were performed on prisoners after injecting them with various diseases, and researchers would perform invasive surgery on prisoners, removing organs to study the effects of disease on the human body. Prisoners would have limbs amputated just so they could study blood loss. Sometimes the limbs that were removed would be attached to the other side of the body just to see what would happen. Some prisoners had their stomachs surgically removed and their esophagus attached to their intestines. Parts of organs, such as brain, lungs, and liver, were removed from others just to see what would happen. Human targets were used to test grenades, positioned at various distance and various positions. Flamethrowers were tested on people. Victims were tied to stakes and used as targets to test pathogen-releasing bombs. Army engineer Hisato Yoshimura conducted experiments by taking captives outside, dipping various appendages into water of varying temperatures, and allowing the limb to freeze. Once it was frozen, he would strike their affected limb with a short stick. In other tests, subjects were deprived of food and water to determine the amount of time until death, placed into low-pressure chambers until their eyes popped out of their sockets, hung upside down until death, crushed with heavy objects, crushed with other victims of Unit 731, electrocuted, dehydrated with hot fans, injected with animal blood, exposed to lethal doses of x-rays. Prisoners were also exposed to tetrodotoxin, which is the pufferfish toxin, as well as heroin and ricin, to name a few. Massive amounts of blood were drained from some prisoners just to study the effects of blood loss. Nakagawa Yamenzo, a professor at Osaka University, studied at Kyoto University during the war. While he was there, he watched footage of human experiments and executions from Unit 731. He later testified about the playfulness of the experimenters. He said, and I quote, "Some of the experiments had nothing to do with advancing the capability of germ warfare or of medicine. There is such a thing as professional curiosity. What would happen if we did such and such? What medical purpose was served by performing and studying beheadings? None at all. This was just playing around. Professional people also like to play." All the prisoners within the compound were killed to conceal evidence, and there were no documented survivors. So nobody who entered 731 came out alive. Happy Halloween. And also thanks for watching.